Animism, harmful to being relieved of poverty. Animism, a worldview that all things are nature spirits and that everything can be accounted for by the activity of spirit beings. Fundamentally anti-scientific in its worldview. And that's a problem when it comes to getting out of poverty in our day. They too, just like the earlier case I mentioned, routinely have to waste their resources on pointless sacrifices and rituals. Health is a huge problem in these cultures because they rely on shamanistic healers who cannot heal and who, if anything, are probably going to result in demonization rather than healing. And that's not going to help anyone get out of their poverty problem either. Religion is a huge problem when it comes to poverty. Oppression. Governmental oppression, probably one of the biggest issues that we face in world poverty. You know, a lot of the poorest nations on earth today will not allow intervention by Christians. If Christians want to intervene, they basically have to deny their Christianity as a prerequisite to get in there and help. If they do go in secretly, they face imprisonment or possibly death. According to Barrett, I don't have this year's sum, this was a few years ago, but Barrett's World Christian Encyclopedia, very authoritative source, said that year 150,000 Christians had been killed worldwide. This is still going on. We look at the slaughter going on in Darfur today, that the people there in southern Sudan are Christians. That's the reason they're being slaughtered. The worst area for poverty in the world today is the so-called 1040 window. This is the area between the 10th and the 40th parallel in the Eastern Hemisphere. Although that same area in the Western Hemisphere isn't too good either. 82% of the poor live inside of that area of the world. And this is an area of the world, by and large, hostile to Christianity, and where it's very difficult to even get in and help. If you do go in, you have to go in secretly, and you have to get under the radar. It's the only way to get in and help. Most of the people living on $1.40 a day in that window. Well, we have put focus on this 1040 window. We believe this is the area that has largely not been penetrated with the gospel and the love of God. This is the part of the world that needs it the most, that is the most resistant to it. So we have, it's interesting too, that 90% of missions dollars spent in the world today by Christians are spent in countries that are already well reached with the gospel. Only 10% is spent in those countries that are unreached. They have no meaningful witness for Christ within them. No church. In a lot of countries that you live today, if you were a poor person, your own government would oppose you becoming comfortable. There would be policies there. There would be bribes that have to be paid. A lot of your money would have to be siphoned off in payola. And also just the complete failure to provide the basic conditions for success. You really have to travel in these countries to get a feeling for how difficult it is. And an Asian city I was recently in, just the experience of going from your home to a market, to get some food was like taking a half-day-long expedition that was dangerous every step of the way. And it's just incredibly, you think of here, if we were in business, we could load up a truck full of product and ship it to Cincinnati. It would be in the warehouse there 2 hours later. In Indonesia, a journey from Jakarta to Bandung is a day-long ordeal, and it's destructive of equipment. It's dangerous. Just the idea of just even having a road there that works. Things that were totally, we think, why didn't the government wire this country? With adequate electricity, with phone lines, with the internet service. It's like that stuff costs money. And in many cases, they could do it, but they have corrupt leaders that are really not that interested in the plight of the poor. Oppression is a huge issue. Neocolonialism is the term that's been coined too for the unhelpful role of the West and the IMF in development of poor countries. The Western world still has control over much of the continent of Africa. Africa pays more to the IMF than it receives each year, despite being the most in need of aid that it offers. Meaning that often nations are left without the ability to provide the basic needs of its population, which leads to ongoing poverty. We say, now wait a minute. They're paying more to the IMF than they receive? Yeah. How could that happen? Because corrupt, oppressive leaders borrowed so much, squandered it off on their little empires. I was reading an article in a magazine a few months back showing this astonishing 160-foot, or was it 260-foot yachts, one of the greatest yachts in the world, and just the totally plush, amazing furnishings inside and all this stuff. And it was owned by an anonymous African ruler. Probably his country is in awful poverty, and he's got this crazy yacht that was just, I don't know how many millions this thing cost, but that kind of stuff's going on all the time. And so they borrow money from the IMF, waste it, and then now the governments are in a position where they owe all this money, and to borrow more is difficult, and they have to, make payments if they're going to get any more, so they wind up sometimes, according to this authority, he said that they're actually paying more than they're receiving in most countries in Africa. Oh man, they're screwed. And these countries need capital. They do not have the money to go out and build the necessary conditions. We think, well, start a business, get something going. That's so much easier to do here. It would be very difficult to succeed. You realize when you're there in these settings, it would be very difficult to succeed in starting a business in this environment. Of the 21 industrialized nations surveyed, the United States is by far the stingiest in proportion to the total wealth, the GNP devoted to helping the world's poor, according to the review. The report noted that the percentage given to development, 0.25%. Well, this is a couple years old. This is a number of years old. We saw last week that's gone down under 0.2%. So it's continuing to drop. Has dropped steadily since 92, when rich nations used to devote 0.33%. So the rich nations aren't going to help. They don't really care that much. They're certainly not going to infringe. We saw last week that even when they do give, they give the proviso that you can use this money only to buy our grain because we want to profit from it at the same time that we're giving out. Usually they won't give out. They'll loan. And so it just creates this debt problem.